Sounds and Voices from Lemaire. April 2022. Anna Furney is a partner at Venus Over Manhattan Gallery in New York. In these Sounds and Voices, Anna tells us about self-taught artist Joseph E. Joachim, whose work have been traveling between Paris, Seoul, and Tokyo. Inscape, an exhibition presented by Lemaire.
I'm Anna Furney. I am a director and partner at Venus Over Manhattan Gallery in New York City. And I'm here in Paris to celebrate an exhibition of work by Joseph Elmer Joachim. I would say my first exposure to art wasn't really a single moment. It was probably kind of more of a theme. Neither of my parents are involved in the art world. I grew up in the country outside of New York in a state called Vermont. But, in retrospect, I realized that I had art around me everywhere. My father was very into music. They didn't own much art, but, my dad had a few Cartier-Bresson photos and things that were, in retrospect, really special. They were his treasures. So I had a lot of art around me, but I didn't realize it. I just grew up in that environment and was very encouraged to pursue music and pursue kind of visual culture, but it was just part of the way we live. And then in my school in college, I studied fine art, so I thought I wanted to make art, which is always kind of the best and worst recipe for an art dealer, because you're a bit of a failed artist, but you're also really fluent in the language of how things are made. After 4 years, and I've been working and running Venus Over Manhattan, I was asked by Adam Lindemann, who at the time was a collector, to come on board, and he was opening a gallery, and would I help him? And I can't believe it, but it's 10 years ago, so a long time. I would say actually in a way that the gallery's program has an attention to artists that are an artist's artist, the artists that practicing artists look at and make references to, that are their heroes. And I'd say that a lot of the artists in our program are that. Art for the sake of art, Self-taught or art brute or outsider is usually artists who've had no formal training. The category of self-taught is exactly that. Many times there's elements of mental illness woven into the story, or that's kind of a way that they explain the reason for eccentric behavior or lack of education. The term kind of ghettoizes them, kind of puts them in a category that implies that it's less than kind of the professionally trained artist. Somebody like Joachim, for example, is he only drew the last 10 years of his life, but of those 10 years, he spent 5 of them making artwork before anybody ever knew that he existed. He's a very interesting character because while he did have children and he was married, there's no estate. Nobody has come out of the woodwork to say he's my... So finding these artworks was incredibly difficult. It took about 2 years to assemble the work for this very first show we did, which was 60 pieces. But that's the treasure hunting I was talking about. It's been told that he had this message from a higher power, from a god. He had a vision, basically, that told him he had to make art. It's kind of a sensationalized story. If you think about the way that he lived and what he had to do for work, the reality was he was an old man who had finally moved to Chicago. He probably, for the first time in his life, had a pension, and he probably had Social Security. So he, in the first time of his life, had the opportunity to sit silently and make things that he otherwise would have had no time for because he was working. very much like a Virginia Woolf phenomenon of a room of one's own. You know, you can make things if you have the space physically to do it and the time. But the magic of Joachim and the magic of Joachim's artwork is that he puts these landscapes together that break the rules of how to build perspective. When they cleared his studio out after he passed away, the studio was covered with National Geographics. So it's like, you know, there's lots of imagination, but there's also some literal interpretation and depiction. He worked really predominantly on paper. He never worked on canvas. He did make a couple of small sculptures, but those were mostly lost or broken, but those were really not part of his practice. If you're looking at the exhibition that Lemaire has and the artworks that they used for the collection, you'll notice certain things. You know, Joachim only drew on paper. He used very simple, crude art materials. They weren't fancy. Most of them were things that you could find in the supermarket. And it wasn't until he had met this group of artists who started to give him better materials that the artwork got a little brighter and crisper. But he's most famous for making these landscape drawings that are really bizarre and amazing. And they defy the rules of perspective, and that's why people love them so much. They kind of collapse in on themselves, and they have strange pockets of trees, and then they start to also anthropomorphize as you start to see animals that are sneakily kind of tucked into these drawings. And they really celebrate Joachim's obsessive mark making. He made these kind of incredible, almost meditations on paper with line and color. You think you're looking on top of like a topographic map, these kind of plays in perspective. You can see kind of the line quality that's formed and the color and the way he sometimes used a little spit to blur the lines. And then oftentimes Joachim's drawings will have titles of geography locations, and he claims to have been to every location that he's drawn. And so they have these great titles that are sometimes misspelled or phonetically spelled, and a date. The thing about Joachim is you really have to see the object in person, because they're 12 by 18-inch drawings for the most part. They're these small jewel drawings that are little kind of, they're magic up close, but you don't realize how the scale is so miniature. The fact that Lemaire has agreed to and really initiated the conversation about having an exhibition of the work that would coincide with the collection is exactly why we said yes to the invitation, because the goal is for more people to see Joachim. And so the work will travel from Paris to Tokyo and then Seoul. You know, it's going to be a celebration of the artist in all of these different cities. So
sounds and voices from Lemaire.